Sorry, we waited a couple of minutes because as usually some people come in just a little too late, but not today apparently. Anyway, let's get started. Now today's subject is on economic dynamism and political change, lessons from Malaysia. Now if you look at the wordings for the seminar, you'll see that there are a few questions that Prof. Wu would like to address. Is the Malaysian economy sick? And then of course he answers yes, and asks what is making it sick, and then finally, what is the international experience in curing the type of economic sickness that Malaysia is suffering from? What general principles can guide such a reform? Now, I won't introduce Prof. Wu by reading what's already there. I think all of you can read that. What I will do by way of introduction is to say that Prof. Wu Wing Tai, before he came back to work in Malaysia, in Penang, was already a very well-known global economist who has studied countries like Russia and China, communist China, basically studying economies in transition. That's a whole new phenomenon in itself. And I think recently he's been involved in studying Myanmar as well, an economy in transition. And then, of course, we come to the more controversial question, is Malaysia an economy in transition? Which is what he will address today, and why it is in transition. And as you see from the PowerPoint here, Prof. Wu is involved in a lot of places. There is no place for more of those universities that he's actually involved in. But these are three of the main ones that he is working with. He spends most of his time now at Penang Institute, where he is running the place, actually. And he is economic advisor to the Chief Minister, Lim Guan Eng. So he's one of those Malaysians who left part of the brain drain, if one calls it that, who left decades ago. But since changes about 5 years ago, he's one of those drawn back by all the possibilities that seems to be there. We don't know what are possible to get done, but he's now gone from academic to being an active member in all of this, and he is actually one of the major authors, if not the author, of the Penang paradigm that was launched in a few Malaysian cities recently, on what's wrong with Malaysia and how Malaysia can get out of it, and Penang is the experimental laboratory, I suppose. So with that, I'll pass the word on to Prof. Wu. We are recording and we are actually filming as well, so I would tell everyone to speak into the mic later when there's Q&A. Thank you. Prof. Wu?
Oh, sorry. Coming in from the provinces, I didn't know the right button to press. The only button I press seems to be nowadays to make people unhappy with what I say. Well, Ambassador Tan, Dr. Uy, and fellow travelers on the Malaysia road. I'm very happy to be here to give a report on some of the work that I've been doing at the Penang Institute. Since we are a small enough group, I would like to invite you to feel free to intervene at any time. Questions, alternative interpretations, or just plain correction of facts or logic. For people who have been following Malaysia in the last 2 months, there are two themes in the coverage of economic issues. The first theme is optimistic forecast of the future, and the second theme is, well, is a pessimistic warning to the population. The first theme has to do with that the economy has taken a turn for the better. The growth rate in the last quarter, in the most recent quarter, is 6.4%, compared with the average of the last 10 years of 5.2%. So the economy grew faster by 1.2 percentage points than the preceding 10 years. The message there is prosperity is just around the corner. The government has gone on to predict that it would become a developed country before 2020. In short, Najib is even better than Mahathir. Mahathir promised a developed Malaysia in 2020. Najib is going to deliver it before 2020. The second type of report that we hear is that if there is a change in government, the economy would collapse because the new government would bankrupt the country, and the stock market recently has gone down by quite a bit, despite the flood of liquidity from the rest of the world, given the zero interest rate policy that's been followed in Japan, Western Europe, and the United States. So if you combine the message of prosperity is just around the corner, plus the message of change means economic collapse, the overall message is don't rock the boat when the going is good. I'd like to suggest that the best way, the analogy we should have in mind when we think of Malaysia is like that of a patient going to his neighborhood clinic. And let me suggest two possible outcomes from the visit of this person to his neighborhood clinic. This person comes in, he tells the doctor, I've been feeling tired a lot of the times. Because of my general state of fatigue, I'm a little depressed. Now let me give you two outcomes, and you tell me whether the doctor is a good doctor or not. The first possible outcome is the patient walks out clapping, dancing, singing. He walks in as the depressed person, and he comes out in much higher spirits. The second outcome is the patient is immediately put under sedation, rushed to the operating room in the nearby hospital, spent 3 weeks in the intensive care unit, and finally discharged in a wheelchair. So which of these two scenarios indicate a good doctor? One, when the guy walks in depressed and comes out happy, and second, he walks in but is carried out. I see a lack of enthusiasm in answering this question, largely because you all recognize it for what it is. This is a stupid question. This is a stupid question because I've not given you the type of information you need to make your decision. Specifically, you want to know what's the medium-term, long-term outcome of this visit. How was he like 2 months later? Better yet, you want to know what was it that's been making him sick, making him tired most of the times. You could say that you could well have the following long-run consequences. The long-run consequence of outcome one is that the patient is dead within 2 hours because the doctor treated the symptoms and not the root cause. The doctor saw that this person is tired and unhappy, so gave him a dosage of adrenaline and LSD. So that stimulation exacerbated an existing heart condition and knocked him off in 2 hours. The second one is the person goes on to live and see the graduation of her granddaughter from college because the doctor had recognized a blocked artery and had taken timely measure. The message which I want to persuade you is that the recent news of higher growth in Malaysia is not a news that could be sustained. It is a temporary kick to the economy engineered by the government's linked companies that have been told to increase their investments in selected locations like Iskandar. So that's the analogy I want to persuade you of. And these are the three questions that I would answer, and then try to convince you of what I see to be the root causes of what's making Malaysia sick. The newspapers in Malaysia could be described as good news papers. We hear a constant flow of great things about the country, like, for example, the number of people getting perfect score in the upper sixth examination went from 315 in 2011 to 423 in 2012. The number of perfect people in Malaysia went up by 25% in 1 year. And this led the Star newspaper to carry the headline, "Malaysia on way to having the world's best education system." This is at odds with what we know to be the international comparison of student performance. The math and science knowledge of the average 15-year-old in Malaysia is that of the average 12-year-old in the rest of the world. Certainly, the average 15-year-old in Malaysia has the science and math knowledge of the average 12-year-old Singaporean. So happiness can be achieved if you have low standards. And clearly, the KPIs, the line that was drawn to allow people to achieve perfect scores, was compromised in this election year to kick the number of people up from 315 last year to 423 this year. So the government itself doesn't believe the good news that it sends out. Why? Because we see one large comprehensive program after another being rolled out. These large, expensive programs that are rolled out reveal some very deep problems about the country. Let me mention 4 of the more well-known programs that have come out in recent times. First, I should first of all prove to you that the Malaysian economy is not doing as well as what has been reported. For example, the news about Malaysia catching up to be a developed country by 2020 is highly unlikely, because let us compare Malaysian performance with 2 East Asian countries that we would recognize as catching up. I compare Malaysia with Taiwan and South Korea. The relevant criteria of catching up is not the absolute level of income. The relevant criteria of catching up is you close the gap between the country and the standard of living in the recognizably richest country in the world. So the criteria we will use is, what is the standards of living in each country compared to the standard of living in the United States? I use the word standard of living. It means that the numbers that you see were produced using a method called purchasing power parity, PPP. In other words, you remove the vagaries of the market exchange rate that could move a lot. So this is the best indicator that economists have of the standard of living. What you do see is Taiwan began in 1963. That is the formation, the year that Malaysia was founded, began at 12% of US living standard. Before the Asian financial crisis, it reached 55% of US living standard. Before the global financial crisis of 2008, it has improved, it has closed the gap by another 11 percentage points. Between 1996 to 2007, that gap was reduced by 11 percentage points. Korea began even poorer, largely because of the Korean War. But you could see it make marked progress. And again, between 1996 and 2007, it closed the gap with the United States by 11 percentage points. And here we have Malaysia, began richer than the other two, 13% of US living standard in 63. And in 96, it went to 30%. It's lower than both Korea and Taiwan, but nevertheless, recognizable progress was made. So we could console ourselves in Malaysia that this is a case of the hare and the tortoise. We are making slow but steady progress, and inshallah, we will well overtake the other two when they have spent themselves. But this confidence is belied by the developments between 97 to 96 to 2007. Malaysia only closed the gap by 1 percentage point. Basically, Malaysia has been stuck at 30% for the last 15 years. There is something that is important about the 30% number, because if you take the 5 largest Latin American countries, their average in 1965 is 30% of US standard of living. Their average in 2008 is 30% of US standard of living. Latin America has been stuck at 30% for at least the last 40 years. This is why we say Latin America is the classic case of middle income trap. And it all comes from the inability to move up the value chain in production. They have been unable to switch to knowledge-based growth. That's what the middle income trap really is all about. Could you or could you not switch to knowledge-based growth? Malaysia clearly shows that it has not been able to do so. The government knows this, and the government has reacted with a series of programs. Specifically, what do we know? Each of the programs reveals something wrong with Malaysia. Let me quickly say 4 of them. One is the Talent Core program, trying to increase the number of high-skilled workers in Malaysia. And of course, this is necessary because there is a great shortage of human talent and hence being unable to move up the value-added chain. The second is a number of regional development initiatives. The one that I have there is the regional initiative for Northern Malaya. Northern Perak, Kedah, and Penang. That's the Northern Development Corridor. In the East Coast, Terengganu, Pahang is another development corridor. And in the south, Iskandar is the development corridor. Why is there a need to have this kind of initiatives? Because the unequal distribution of economic prosperity has made it politically dangerous for UMNO. And that's why it's responding to the needs for more regional equality. The third thing is, when we hear of the good news of Malaysia growing at 6.4% compared with the average of the last 10 years of 5.2%, that is good news only if we not look at what was the average 10-year growth rate before 1997, before the Asian financial crisis. That growth rate for Malaysia was almost 8.5%. So going from 8.5 to an average of 5.2. Why was that so? That happened because the investment rate, the amount of investment over GDP, has fallen by half in Malaysia. What is growth? Growth is expansion in production capacity. In order to increase production capacity, you have to increase the capital stock. And if the capital stock is not being increased, the growth rate slows down. So the drop in the Malaysian growth rate is a reflection of the drop in investment in Malaysia. And so that's why the government introduced the economic transformation program. The goal is to kick up the investment rate. And it did kick it up successfully in the last quarter, right before elections. Up until the last quarter, none of these programs worked. They had very little success to report. And the response of the government is, the reason why the first three programs have not worked is because the government has not been doing a good job in getting its components to work together to produce the synergy to sustain growth. So what we need is we introduce a coordination, introduce a new government agency known as Pemandu, which means driver, and to coordinate the work of the different ministries. And one of Pemandu's first job is to introduce KPIs for each ministry so that you could catch the laggard and so forth. Well, one thing I want to note about Pemandu is that that particular initiative typifies the first three initiatives. Pemandu is nothing new. It is a scaling up of existing programs. Before Pemandu, in the early 1990s, Mahathir was unhappy with the performance of the Malaysian civil service. So he created a nationwide agency known as MAMPU, M-A-M-P-U. The acronyms are in English, just like UMNO. Basically, the point of MAMPU is to ride herd on the government agencies and get them to work. 5 years later, MAMPU, in Malay words, actually mampu. In that, there was no visible progress. And what was Mahathir's response? Instead of getting rid of MAMPU, he introduced the Implementation Coordination Unit with branches in every state and in every government agency. The role of ICU is to coordinate the work and produce KPIs for all the ministries. As you could see, Mahathir, with no sense of irony, knew that the country needed an ICU treatment. And what happened? ICU did not work and is still in existence, and so that's why we have Pemandu along the existing other two. The talent core is a magnification of the returning expert program. The regional development initiatives is collecting the regional initiatives from all the different ministries under one roof. The economic transformation program is attempt to attract even more foreign FDI and to persuade local industrialists to increase their investment. So, in other words, most of the reforms that we have seen in the post-Mahathir period under Najib and Padawi are in essence just scaling up of things that Mahathir has done. And now I'd like to talk about what I see to be the root causes of each of the symptoms. The symptom of not enough high-skilled labor, not enough investment, unequal geographical distribution of prosperity, and a government that is below its potential in performance. Those are the symptoms, and I would like to suggest the following root causes. The way I do it is to first talk about what the government policy has been and what the adjustment of the private sector and the outcome we see. The first thing is that in Malaysia, we have a wide array of socio-economic policies that systematically downgrade ability as a criteria for promotion or for admissions into university. Relationship is very important. In fact, this neglect of merit has led to substantial brain drain. And in the last 10 years, the brain drain is noticeable even in the Malay community. So we have now a generalized phenomena of brain drain, and not because of some money-grabbing ethnic group, people from a particular ethnic group. And because of this brain drain, we have got a shortage of human talent. Malaysia has a tax on firms that grow. Specifically, when a firm wants to grow by listing on the stock exchange to raise funds, it has to hand over 30% of its shares to investors approved by the government. So if you grow, you make a loss of control, possibly of your firm, and certainly you have to sell parts of your shares at a discount. So what is the response? If you look at SMEs in Malaysia, the number that have grown is less than the number of fingers I have. Basically, you grow by leaving Malaysia. You move to Singapore or you move to Hong Kong. Shangri-La is now a Hong Kong-listed company. So given the tax on companies that grow, they leave the country. How much capital flight is there in Malaysia? According to a recent study, if you add up all the capital flight of different countries in the world, China is number 1, Malaysia is number 2, and Mexico is number 3. Let's take the year 2010. $600 billion ran out of China. 63 billion ran out of Malaysia. So 600 billion from China, 63 from Malaysia, 54 billion from Mexico. If you do it on a per capita basis, in the case of China, it's $300 per person that ran out. In the case of Mexico, $500 per person that ran out. In the case of Malaysia, $2,275 that left in 2010. So there's this massive capital outflow from Malaysia that has been occurring. The third thing explains the inequality in regional development. Malaysia is way over centralized. For example, every bus line, every bus route in Penang was designed in Putrajaya. Every bus stop on that bus route was determined in Putrajaya. And this was done for the last 30 years before Google Earth came to existence, whereby the bureaucrat could at least look at the map and see where to put the stop. It is so centralized that if you look at total government expenditure, the federal government spent 94%. The 13 states together spent 6%. This means that the states do not have the capacity to supply infrastructure to support local growth. Production bottlenecks are just rampant outside of the Klang Valley. Revenue is one thing. What makes the local government unable to supply initiatives is that there was a big change from 1957. When the Federation of Malaysia was formed, every state had the right to borrow on the world market for local infrastructure. But that right was taken away. This is very much unlike New York City when it wants to upgrade Kennedy Airport. It would set up an airport agency, borrows the money on Wall Street, and then build the facility, and with the user fees, you service the loan. That is standard operating procedure. When Canary Wharf was built in London, that was exactly the vehicle that is used. But in Malaysia, that's not possible. The only source of revenue is the federal government. The local government is unable to undertake infrastructure investment to enable local industrial growth. The most extreme example would be University Science Malaysia, located in Penang, has a larger budget than the Penang state government. In the Klang Valley, there are 20 comprehensive universities. In Penang, there is 1.5 comprehensive university. The half is Wawasan, and which has applied for comprehensive status for the last 10 years, never been approved. And in the meanwhile, 10 others have been approved in the Klang Valley. So you could see it is very much unlike New York, Boston, San Francisco, where they could match each other in intellectual firepower and in cultural vibrancy. Basically, Malaysia is a very centralized country, and the other and so the result is that we have this huge geographical inequality in development. And the reason for why the government has been so hard to get in achieving its target is because it's hard to monitor the operations of the bureaucracy. By design, the operations of bureaucracy is hidden. What is one of the biggest duty? It is government procurement. That process is completely opaque. There is no open tender. It's entirely awarded or at the discretion of the state. That's very good for patronage power, but terrible for monitoring and accountability. Without monitoring, accountability is not possible. Without accountability, we cannot expect the government agency to perform in anything other than quite poor. I've said all these negative things, but we know that all these negative policies were steadily put in place since 1970. Before 1996, all these policies were in existence. But yet, the economy grew at almost 8.5% a year. It is only in 96 that something happened. What is it that happened? In other words, all this brain drain, capital flights, insufficient hard infrastructure, substandard soft infrastructure has always been there. But somehow, growth rate was 8.5%. It is only after 2000 that we could clearly see why, the negative effects. Why? Because the world changed in a very big way in 2000. Actually, the world changed in 1990, on January 1st, 1990. The big change in 2000 was when that night in May 2000, when Jiang Zemin sent Zhu Rongji to tell Yutai, to tell Long Yongtu, sign the WTO agreement with the Americans, even though the Americans are being extremely unreasonable. Why? Because until China was a member of WTO, China needed annual approval from US Congress for most favored nation status. Only with most favored nation status could China export to the US with no discrimination. It was treated like any other country. So it meant that at any point in time, the US could unilaterally turn off China's most reliable growth engine without violating international law. So if you were investing in China, like let's say in textile, it would be wise for the foreign investor to also open a few factories in Southeast Asia. Because in case you cannot ship from your China factory that year, you can ship from your Southeast Asian factory. But once China was guaranteed access to the US and Western European markets from 2000 onwards, there was this switch in FDI away from Southeast Asia towards China. And at the same time, India has come online since around 1991. India has become a lot more welcoming of foreign investment, which is a big reputation of the past policy of being ruled by the multinational corporation East India Company for 200 years. But India got over that. Indonesia got over that. Basically, the rest of the world has opened itself to FDI in a way that was not seen in the early 1970s. So what made Malaysia grow during that time was domestic capital runs out, domestic skilled labor runs out, foreign capital came in, foreign labor came in, and that replacement allowed the economy to grow. But once China joined WTO, that replacement capital and that replacement flow of skilled labor was reduced dramatically. And because it was reduced dramatically, whatever complementary domestic investment that was being undertaken were no longer being undertaken. So the private investment sunk to half the level of what it was. And with the sinking of private investment to half what it was, the growth rate took a big dive downwards. Everything I said about those policies could be thought of as the following ways. The policies that Malaysia had implemented were actually emergency room procedures that were arguably pragmatic policies at the time they were implemented, but no longer suitable once past the short term. Basically, it's like if someone's heart has stopped, you do CPR. But if CPR has revived the person, you don't keep him going by continuing to do CPR. You move on to another cure. What Malaysia did is all these numerical quotas for government positions in different places, in university, in government service, was very good in creating a Malay middle class very quickly. But its continued use, especially its abandonment of meritocracy and the idea of excellence, meant that these particular criteria were not used even within the Malay community. So that's why you have this brain drain. And this 30% shares was clearly to increase the Malay ownership of stocks. But what is the record? When Najib first came in, he attempted to modify this. And because this doesn't work, he says, of the 54 billion ringgit worth of shares that were given to Malays from 1970 to 2009, 58 billion, only 2.4 billion still remain in the hands of the Bhumiputra. In other words, only 5% of what that was handed out had stayed in the hands of the Bhumiputra. So this program clearly did not work. And so he reduced it to 12.5%. Is there ground for optimism that having reduced it from 30% to 12.5% would work? That would not work. Why? Because Hong Kong still collects 0%. Singapore still collects 0%. 12.5% is significantly greater than 0. So why should you still stay in Malaysia to pay the 12.5%? And the over-centralization of power came about because, how it's easy to understand, you ask yourself, when did the United Kingdom abandon the market economy? The United Kingdom abandoned the market economy only during the 2 world wars. When there's an existential crisis, you have to centralize strength to fight the existential danger. And Malaysia was founded in the midst of a communist insurgency in 1957 and then faced the Indonesians in 1963. So Malaysia used to have all the bus lines run by the local city councils. But the city councils were all abolished in 1965 because the government said, we are being threatened by Indonesia, let us not waste our time with local electioneering, so they canceled all the local elections. And Suharto has disappeared very quickly after the cancel of the local elections, but the local elections have yet to come back. Possibly the most important reason for the cancelling of the local elections has less to do with this dissipation of energy and attention. The reason why they were cancelled is because most of the city councils in the largest cities in Malaysia were all run by Chinese councillors, because the Chinese were the majority in the main cities. And so they could see that this is training ground for Chinese parties to be able to be recognized for performance and be able to grab state power, the power at the state level eventually. Because within each state, in every state except for Penang, the Malays were the majority. So if you have only state-level elections but not city council elections, the Malays would dominate the country. So one reason why the city council elections was cancelled was because it removed the training ground for Chinese who could prove that they could do a good job. It's just the same reason why Singapore had to be kicked out of the Federation of Malaysia. Lee Kuan Yew was doing just too much of a damn good of a job of what he could do if he were given a bigger arena to operate. So this over-centralization of power came for political expediency, justified by the emergencies that Malaysia faced. The non-transparency in federal operations, of course, has a lot to do with the excuse that why do you bother to have city councillors who cannot even read a balance sheet? After all, the bureaucrat is the only one who understands the balance sheet, and having him explain it to people who cannot understand is a waste of time. So let's get rid of these people who won't understand anyway. So there was that excuse. But all of these excuses are no longer true. But yet, we are still stuck with the policies that were set up at these points in time, of those times. I think that the principle number one when it comes to economic reform in Malaysia, the first principle is you've got to treat the root causes of the disease and not the symptoms. Instead of asking people to come back, stop driving them out in the first place. In other words, it is like the following. The patient calls me up and says, I've got a terrible headache. I said, take 2 aspirins. Then he calls me up again and says, I still have the terrible headache. What do? I could say, take 12 aspirins. But what I should do is call him in and look at him. Then I would see what the cure should be. I'll tell him, stop beating yourself on the head, and you'll feel a lot better. Basically, a lot of the problems that Malaysia has, that these programs are trying to address, is a self-inflicted wounds. Instead of while you're beating yourself in the head, you try to put a piece of newspaper between you and your fist. And so far, that has not worked. So I see Malaysia is facing a fork in the road. The fork in the road is you either attack the root causes or you continue doing more of the same. Like as I said, all those 4 programs that I just told you earlier were magnification of existing policies. What can best illustrate this tendency to do more of the same than when Najib came to Penang, when Najib brought Syed of Kannam fame to Penang? He talked to the crowd before Syed came on stage. He said, "Are you ready for BN?" The crowd said, "No." Then he said again, "Are you ready for BN?" And the no was even louder. The amazing thing is, he's asked a 3rd time, "Are you ready for BN?" Why? It was in the script. Somehow doing more of the same will get you out of trouble. This is quite incredible. That's the mentality. If I work hard enough doing what I'm doing, I'll succeed. In other words, if I drive my car faster, I'll get to the moon. When the only way you can get to the moon is in a rocket. Well, not accidentally enough, the symbol of another political party in Malaysia. I think before I get to the other 2 lessons, the other 4 lessons, I'd like to show the broad picture of that there are very few elected governments that last forever. Possibly the only thing that lasts forever is love. Because the Soviet Union, which is the big, I would say, dividing line in my youth, basically I've never expected the Soviet Union to disappear. I've always grew up in a world of a choice of 2, capitalism or central planning. And what happened? The Soviet Union disappeared without anyone attacking it from the outside. It just imploded after 74 years. And we saw that Park Chung-hee's successor party, the Grand National Party, disappeared after 36 years. Suharto, Gokha, disappeared after 33 years. The Kuomintang disappeared after, well, lost power, didn't disappear, lost power after 55 years. And the Institutional Revolutionary Party lost power after 71 years. But history is full of ironies. I told you that they lost power, but if we look at today, they have come back. Park Chung-hee has won power for the GNP in Korea, Ma Ying-jeou for the Kuomintang in Taiwan, and Enrique Pena Nieto for the Institutional Revolutionary Party in Mexico. There's one difference. These parties are back in power, but they are not doing what they used to do before. They no longer practice the old policies. Instead, they have embraced and expand upon the policies of the groups that had driven them out. Basically, their claim of legitimacy right now is what we can do, what those guys that push us out better than what they would do. In other words, the student has overtaken the teacher. Like you look at the rhetoric of Ma Ying-jeou, he's very careful to talk about he'll be glad to merge with China when China becomes a democratic country. Basically, China becoming more like Taiwan, you know. And if you look at what the policies of Enrique of the most recent time, is exactly breaking the monopolies of the traditional supporters of PRI. So what we have seen is that the stints out of power is important because it allows the party to settle its internal debate in a very decisive way. What makes progress possible? progress is made possible funeral by funeral. Basically, the old people have to step aside and let the new take over and push it in the direction that society aspires to move in. So I'd like to come to the second principle of what we have on the, of those national experiences I just reviewed. The second principle is the new broom sweeps clean. New political leaders that are not encumbered by inherited vested interests are more likely to initiate turning points in economic management. You could compare what Gorbachev did and what Boris Yeltsin did. Gorbachev was the designated successor by the establishment. Yeltsin was the person who walked out of the party in 1988, went into political wilderness, formed his own party, got elected to be the president of Russia, a component of the Soviet Union, powerless. But then, during the coup of August 1991, he took over. We can see the difference between Hua Guofeng, whom Mao appointed, with the famous words of 由您办事我放心, with you in charge, I'm at ease. And he was pushed aside by Deng Xiaoping, and because Deng Xiaoping came from a different political faction from Hua Guofeng, he could turn his back on those policies. The basic point is that for an incumbent to completely turn 180 degrees is a threat to his political legitimacy. To turn 180 degrees is a public confession that you have screwed up in the last 10 years, 15 years. And now people would naturally ask, if you have screwed up in the last 15 years, why are you still in charge? The only way you could really justify it is to say, hey, the world has changed. Because the world has changed, that's why I reverse direction. But if you don't have that excuse, you really cannot change. Now, let me get to this point which has caused a lot of debate, which I want to address, which is that the immediate response of the economy to growth under Russia and Poland was a collapse in output for around 2-3 years, 10% each year. And in the case of China, the immediate result is a growth rate of 9.5%, sustained. So many people say that new broom may sweep clean, but when you sweep, you should sweep slowly. So in other words, haste makes waste. When you move quickly, the thing tumbles, and so you need to move slowly. One person has this picturesque analogy of the following. How do you wake somebody up? You can grab him by the shoulder and shake him, but if you shake him too hard, he snaps his neck and he's gone. The other one is, stroke him by his cheek, maybe pull a few of his nose hairs, and whisper sweet nothings in his ear, and the person wakes up refreshed and ready to perform. I think that analogy is just foolish. It's simply not that way. This debate on the so-called shock therapy versus gradual reform is just too simple-minded. Because the speed of what you do depends on the particular task that is at hand. For example, how do you deregulate prices? Imagine an economy where all prices are controlled. You could do the following slow strategy. Announce that 3 weeks from now, the prices of soap will be deregulated. Another 3 weeks after that, the price of perfume will be deregulated. And another 3 weeks after that, the prices of toilet paper will be deregulated. What do you think will happen if I announce this slow plan of reform? Complete chaos. Because people who buy know that the prices will go up, they want to buy now. People who sell know that the prices will go up, will hide their stock and sell later. Complete chaos. So the only way to really, complete chaos, more than that, the plan stinks. It stinks because there's no soap, there's no perfume, and there's no toilet paper. So for this particular task, you have to move quickly. You have to basically remove the control prices simultaneously and comprehensively. But how about privatization? The only way you can privatize quickly and comprehensively is to say the managers can take the firm. That's the only way you can do it quickly. Otherwise, it's a long process, right? In other words, privatization can take two forms. You put all the state property at one end, you draw a line at the other end, and everybody lines up behind that line. You give everybody vouchers, you blow the whistle, and they run for it. That takes time, that arrangement. The other way is you guys can just run from whatever your starting point is. So privatization done very quickly would be economically inefficient and politically unpopular. So reforms, fast or slow, that's ridiculous. It depends on what's the job. What is it? So in fact, if you look at all the countries that have moved from market economies to centrally planned economies, there's no relationship between economic growth and speed. Look at all the Central European and Eastern European countries. Poland moved very fast, output slumps. Hungary moved fast, output slumps. Ukraine, a country that I worked in, on the first day that Ukraine got independence, you know what the president said? I'm trying to remember his name. He said, what is it that we have done wrong that we were given independence? Because all ambitious, capable Ukrainians, when they were part of the Soviet Union, were in Moscow trying to climb the bureaucratic ladder. The only people left behind were those who could follow orders. So when independence came, all these guys who could follow orders were left in charge. And that's why the president said, what did we do wrong that we were given independence? And what did Ukraine do? Nothing. Output declined. How about those who reformed slowly, like Romania? Output declined. Bulgaria moved slowly, Chinese style. Output declined. So basically, fast or slow in Eastern Europe, collapsed in every case. In Asia, China moved slowly, growth was quick. Vietnam moved, decontrolled all prices overnight in March 1989, stopped subsidies to state enterprises overnight in 1989, brought the black market exchange rate from 50 dong to 50,000 dong overnight, and the economy jumped from 5% a year immediately to 8% in the last half of the year and continued going at that rate until the Asian financial crisis. That is not an exception because Laos, which at that time was under the influence of Vietnam, also did this massive, quick reform. Remove all price controls at once, stop printing money immediately, and free the exchange rate. And the Laotian economy also jumped 3 percentage points in growth rate. Why? It is because the response of the economy depends on what's making the economy sick in the first place. The initial conditions were very different between Eastern Europe and East Asia. What we see in Eastern Europe is, regardless of what they do, output fell. In East Asia, fast or slow, output went up. What's the big difference? Eastern European countries are already industrialized, already urbanized. East Asia, they are peasant farmers, typify the economy. So what was wrong in Eastern Europe? In Eastern Europe, the problem was they were producing too much heavy industrial goods, not enough light industrial product. That's why you have to line up to buy clothes, line up to buy light bulbs, line up to buy refrigerators, because the resources were focused on producing iron and steel. And the iron and steel, in turn, were used to build another iron and steel factory. Because that's what central planning is. You start off from the starting point, which Stalin set, and then you go along the template. and change incrementally. So there were way too much heavy industries. So how could light industries grow? Light industries could grow only if the heavy industries release the capital, release the labor to the light industries. That's why this collapse in iron and cement, and the light industries therefore grew. But this has much less impact on the standard of living. You cannot eat iron, you cannot eat cement, although iron pills would be the exception. Basically, the amount of iron produced in the Soviet Union per dollar of GDP is higher than, 2 times higher than that in the United States, Japan, and West Germany. They were so focused on that. So there's no way that the economy, the light industries could grow without the heavy industries die. So that process is economic restructuring. In the case of China, the proportion of people who are farmers in 1978, 85%. No, 82%. 82%. The proportion of people who are farmers in Vietnam in 1989, 90%. Proportion of people who are farmers in Laos, 95%. So when the government allowed the establishment of private industries, light industries were established, and where could they get workers? They got workers straight out from the countryside. There was no need to kill the heavy industry. And the new industries could grow because they pay wages lower than the state enterprises, but higher than the farmers. So, but the more important point, that is known as economic development, industrial. But the more important point is fast or slow is actually quite irrelevant. Direction is the most important. If you're heading the wrong direction, fast or slow is really quite... The important thing about China, the slow speed, is due to political factors. Why couldn't Deng Xiaoping completely repudiate what Mao did? Because he was in a different faction, but within Mao's party. He could not completely repudiate. And furthermore, the people who was in his faction, many of them were old men who were against the change to capitalism. So that is why you see economic reforms in China speeded up, because the old men have been dying. Progress comes funeral by funeral. So China reformed slowly was because of political factors. Now the fourth thing is instruments of reform. I think the instruments of reform, the motto is adopt and adapt. There are very few problems that are truly new. For example, a busted banking system. Look at what other countries that have had financial crisis. What did they do to clean up? You do the same. So there is this debate that is often here about you should always find the policies that are best suited for your circumstances. That's why you don't borrow from the West. That is a mistake, thinking of global style change versus local change. Like when you switch from central planning to market economy, that's a global level change. But when you talk about the details of within that switch, that's local level. That is adaptation. And I think a lot of that debate has been confused by that. The fifth principle is that any government that takes over, well, certainly in the case of Malaysia, whoever takes over will inherit a mess. The fact is, why does the government lose power? The government has lost power because it has served its people poorly. And the most common way of serving people poorly is that they have lost control of the budget. But they have managed to hide the information, just like the way the Greeks hid the size of the budget deficit for 10 years. And that hidden deficit, because it's still in existence, it destabilized the economy in different ways, because money is being printed to finance it. So, therefore, the fifth lesson is whoever wins must be ready to act, because you have a short honeymoon period. And the best way to act is if your program has already been approved. So the issuance of a manifesto that is quite very detailed by Pakatan is exactly that to get legitimacy from the voters. So when it comes in, there's no more debate of whether we should do this or not do that, because this was the manifesto we were elected in, and it has won. So we have the political legitimacy to implement. So what is the manifesto really has to spell? The truth is, if you look at countries in transition, it usually happens because the existing government has lost control of the budget. And how do you solve that budget problem? You could raise taxes immediately, cut spending immediately. The thing is, there are two ways to do it. One way is you find a sugar daddy from the outside. That was exactly the Suharto solution. When Sukarno was overthrown, what happened? How was the budget dealt with that Suharto had to be responsible for? The Americans sat on the Japanese and its Western allies to set up IGGI, Intergovernmental Group on Indonesia. The whole point of IGGI is to hand over money to Indonesia to keep Indonesia from turning communist. Indonesia had the largest communist party outside of the Iron Curtain. So that's why Sugar Daddy existed. And that's why Sugar Daddy did not exist for Suharto in 1998. Because the Cold War was over, Suharto was dispensable. So given the fact that the Cold War is over, the Malaysian cannot possibly get an easy sugar daddy. They have to come up with a plan whereby they could continue to get loans from the private markets. And you could only do it if you have a credible plan that would control the budget and to raise the private investment rate, which would then restore growth. These 5 principles that I just outlined were used by my institute in drawing up a plan for Penang, which in essence a plan for Malaysia. And the favor I'm asking in return from you for my talk is that you get on the net and tell me how to improve the Penang paradigm so that after the elections, if the present government is returned, we would have a better plan to serve the people of Penang. The plan that I have is based on the 5 principles that I just talked about. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wu. That was quite a tapestry of you know, all the things right and wrong with Malaysia and over a long period of time, and also seen in the very, very interesting concept of how other countries have experienced their transitions. Well, the floor is open to questions. Please state name and affiliation and keep your questions short, please. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Ang Sin Hock. I am a member of the public in Singapore. I want to get to the beginning of your talk. You started by comparing Malaysia with Republic of Korea and Republic of China. And then, you know, what you have done is to show that Malaysia generally comes off worse. Why didn't you choose some other countries in Southeast Asia? You know, for example, Thailand or Indonesia together. I think, you know, whatever countries you choose from Southeast Asia, including China, and you compare them with Republic of China and Republic of Korea, using all the parameters that you have just used. These countries would come off worse than those 2 countries, just like Malaysia has been. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I may have missed your presentation, but it seemed that you haven't mentioned about financial sector sufficiently. And many people that say that in all over the world, financial sector has been growing too much, and that caused economic crisis. So in your Penang paradigm, how do you see the role of financial sector? Thank you.
May I just add on to okay, I'm Yap Jia Ching, I'm a student associate member of the ISEAS. May I just add on to the first gentleman's question about your choice of countries? Like, how much do you think that those two countries, the Republic of Korea and Taiwan, would fit into the flying geese model that followed from Japan's rise when Malaysia does not seem to have benefited as much from it? And perhaps you could elaborate on why Malaysia could not benefit that much from it, from the rise of Japan as seen in the flying geese model that could be applied to the Republic of Taiwan and Korea. Thank you.
I'll take one more question, Ken, at some, and then we'll have a break.
Hello. Good evening. Thank you very much, Professor Wu. I'm actually from Penang. I'm on a PhD program at the Malay Studies Department. I've always wanted to ask someone about this Penang paradigm thing. I think nothing much is different because when I look at Lim Guan Eng talk and Liu Chin Tong, most of the things they say also come from you. Also, are the same things that you just presented. But what I wanted to ask was this: I get it. I realized that you pointed out, and I think it's correct to a certain extent, that it's important to follow global and international standards. But that also means imitating and copying certain things, and I suppose this relates to what the gentleman has asked. What about the systems that are morally immoral, for instance? What about the policies that are immoral? For instance, in Penang, you come up with the Penang paradigm. If the indication of DAP's or Pakatan rule in the last 5 years is anything, it can be used as an indicator. I don't see anything different, but of course they are just a state government, so it has a lot of caveats to my statement. But I'm just trying to say that there's nothing much different, and if there's anything that we notice is, and this comes out a lot from civil society, I'm sure you're aware also, that there's a lot of vulgar and crass developmentalism in Penang. A lot of things have been invested in property, things physical rather than cultural and political and educational. And also, I point out, I just like to highlight this global and local thing is because I'm very cautious when there's change. I suddenly see the state or the country taken over by investors, bureaucrats, and technocrats. I am very cautious of these categories of people. I don't know whether you fall into this category or not. But, you know, these technocrats and bureaucrats, and sometimes economic development has its also other dimensions, especially in Malaysia, especially racial. And it will be interesting to see when the elections come. I like to see how the Malay electorate on Seberang Jaya and on the Malay Penang mainland, you know, reacts to such economic. It will give us an indicator, and I think it's more complicated than that, than just to suggest changes in accordance to certain economic theories or principles, if I can say it. Thank you.
I'd like to take the last question first. Things have not changed. For the last 15 years, the state government has always run, before Lim Guan Eng came in, has always run a budget deficit. Under this government, it has run a larger and larger budget surplus. Not because the federal government has been giving Lim Guan Eng more and more money over time. If anything, the growth of transfer from the federal government to the local government has slowed down for Penang. How is Penang able to do that while greatly expanding the amount, the government expenditure on social programs? Penang is the only state in the country to have eliminated absolute poverty. Absolute poverty is defined as when basic nutrition, basic housing is not met. Penang is the only state that has eliminated it through direct transfer from the state government to these people. The minimum household income for Malaysia defines poverty. So absolute poverty is really deep poverty. Poverty in Malaysia is defined as 763 ringgit per month per family. In 2013, there would not be a single family that is below the poverty line, because we have now designed a program. We have got all the data of the people who are below 770 ringgit, and we would give them a top-up to bring them to that level. Why have we been able to do that? Despite and do that and increase, eliminate the budget deficit without more federal money. Largely because Lim Guan Eng found that everything that he is buying costs roughly 70% of what Kosu Kun used to pay for. Open tender is nothing new, because it's practiced everywhere else in the world. It's nothing new, but it doesn't mean that it's not correct. So your first statement saying that what I say is what Liu Chin Tong has said, as what Mr. Lim Guan Eng has said, there's nothing new. I'm proud that it's nothing new, but I'm proud that it is correct. There's nothing wrong in nothing new. There is everything wrong if it is not correct. So that particular point, I do not know how to view. There is nothing new. It's okay, I say, as long as it is not incorrect. The thing about immoral society and that, let me ask the following question. In the days of old, when someone borrowed money and cannot return it, what happened to that individual? Take the 14th century, or even China as recently as the 18th century, 19th century. You borrow money, you cannot return it. Or even in Malaysia in the 1700s. The lender would make you his slave. Take your wife, eat your dog, and take your bicycle for sure. No, that is what happens, right? Slavery was very common. Why is slavery no longer with us today? Because there's this one, but many cultures, but there's one ideal. In many cultures, there's this common ideal: repent and you shall be saved. In other words, if you reform, everyone deserves a second chance. 回头是岸. Among all these cultures who believe in that, in one of them, they came up with the bankruptcy law. The bankruptcy law is basically, you were stupid to borrow to do stupid things, but the guy who lent it to you was stupid to have let you done the stupid thing. Since both of you were stupid, both of you should pay for it. That's why we have bankruptcy laws, right? You pay what you can, and even though it's not the full amount, that's it. He got to take the loss, and you can start anew. In a society that doesn't believe that everyone deserves a second chance, that does not believe in 回头是岸, does it mean you shouldn't adopt the bankruptcy law? Even if you don't believe that particular moral imperative, you should still adopt that practice. Do you know why? Because it's good for the economy, and hence it's good for you. Because with that bankruptcy law, that is how actuarial science came into existence. Risk assessment science came to existence, because all of a sudden, if you lend money for someone to do something stupid, you end up with a loss. So with risk assessment, cost-benefit analysis development, then economic growth was able to take off to a higher level. So even if a country that has does not believe in the moral imperative of Hoi To She'an, would still take the bankruptcy law, even though it was backed by a foreign culture and developed elsewhere. The whole point of what I'm trying to say is that many instruments are at their basic essence ideological and moral free. It is efficient for economic development. So when you say imitation, what are you imitating? Quality of excellence, high standard. That's what you want. What is it about Japan that makes it so different from the fates of China? It sent its students across the world studying the best and bringing home the best and adapting it for domestic use. Nothing wrong with imitation. I'm proud to have been a student of many minds that are much superior to mine. No shame in imitating. I hope I imitate with a difference in that I recognize that it is not usable for certain local circumstances, so I don't do it. Education, in a sense, is also learning by example. So I do not see this as particularly undesirable. And nor do I see it as that you've got to choose instruments that are only in line with your cultural values. There are many instruments that may not have originated in your culture, but it is not at odds with your culture, like the bankruptcy law. Even though I believe that no one should ever get a second chance, but I still should still follow bankruptcy laws. And when you talk about the lack of development in Penang, there's a lot of work to be done. And we come back to the first two questions. Why did I select Korea? Why did I select Taiwan? Why don't I select Zimbabwe? Why don't I select Myanmar? That is basically seeking happiness by setting low standards. Is that what we want? Or should we seek happiness from our achievements? We are proud of our ability to imitate creatively.
No, you can select Thailand, Indonesia, Singapore.
Are they catching up with the US? The important thing is there are two processes to catching up. One is, are you catching up? Are you closing the gap? The other one is, it's not just a matter of speed. What if you are stuck at 30% and not moving? That is problem. Why compare yourself with countries that are not visibly moving ahead? Is it crass materialism? 我自己是狗命一条啊. It doesn't matter whether I become as rich, have a level of standard of living as high as Americans, okay? But I do it, why? Because I want my parents to get first world medical care. And if I don't have a first world income, my parents will never get first world medical care. I want my parents to live longer than my great-grandparents. I want my children to get a first-class education. I cannot afford a first-class education unless I got a first world income. The whole point of catching up is a moral imperative for your parents and for your children.
Okay.
For your own self, you might be just consider yourself a 狗命一条.
Okay.
So
you can still select Indonesia, Thailand, or Singapore.
Oh, select Singapore? Then Malaysia would certainly show the same thing. We'll be stuck at 30% or whatever the number is. The reason you don't select the worst performers, that's all. You select excellence.
No. What I'm saying is this. If you take Singapore, Indonesia, or Thailand and compare with Korea
Okay.
or Taiwan, each of these countries would probably come off as good or as worse as Malaysia.
No, the point is, are we catching up? That's why I chose the criteria, because my question is defined as, are you catching up? I'm not comparing at random.
Also, Malaysia was ahead of the other two at the time when you started.
No, yeah.
These other countries are below Malaysia.
But the important thing is, to answer the question of are we catching up, my way is the right way. For your question of comparison at random, you are right. Zimbabwe would be just as good. So I agree with what you said. Then we have come back to another question of the financial sector. The financial sector in policy for Malaysia has screwed the small medium enterprises after 1998. Why? What was Tun Dim's reaction to the Asian financial crisis? At that time, there were around 50 private banks in Malaysia, spread across the spectrum in size. He consolidated all of them together. He wanted 4 groups, one of them him taking over, but due to too many independent warlords, 10 business groups, 10 banking groups, maybe 10, I forgot what the number is, but certainly less than 12. What's the outcome of that? The outcome of that is that it basically denies financing to small, medium enterprises and prevent them from growing. Because who lend to small, medium enterprises? Small, medium private banks. Because for a bank making $100 million loan, the paperwork is about the same as a $10,000 loan. So why make a lot of $10,000 loans if the paperwork is the same? So for small, medium banks, these are all local managers, people who grew up in the local community. So they're more willing, they know the credibility and ability of most of the local entrepreneurs because they had gone to school with them. They may not, the ability of this entrepreneur may be low, but he knows the ability of his wife is very high. So he's willing to invest, to lend him the money. But when you got a gigantic bank with branches in all of this, the branches are all deposit takers. They take the money, send them to the metropolis to be lent to the big firms. So economic growth in Malaysia took a very big knock, unequal result after the Asian financial crisis. We created a whole bunch of things that are now too big to fail. The government has to bail them out even more. And how are the GLCs able to make the big investment that kick the GDP growth rate to 6.4? It's because we now live in a zero interest rate world. The banks could borrow all this money from the outside and lend it to the GLCs. And if you look at what Najib has done in the recent weeks, every time he visits a GLC, he gives them a bonus. He has just raised the pension payments to the retired civil servants. Every time he visits a government ministry, he just raised the salary scale. Talking about populism, I had said that you inherit a mess because you've lost control of the budget. Basically, Najib is willing to stay the boss of a bankrupt shop than to be not boss at all. And what is going to happen? There will be a big increase in the GST, largely because I think Petronas' kitty is empty. And that's why, for a long time, investment had been low, because Petronas is not just bailing out everybody anymore. So on the financial sector part, one thing that has to be done is that small, medium banks would have to be welcome in Malaysia again, just like local council elections will have to be reintroduced in Malaysia.
I'll take one last question. You've been waiting a long time. Is that two questions then? Okay. Is that all right, Prof?
Oh, yeah. Okay. People can leave. It's 4:30, but those who can stay, you're very welcome.
Please keep it short. Yeah.
I don't want to operate this machine.
Just speak up. You are sitting opposite me.
Yeah.
Can I ask this question? If I may listen, Tunku Aziz was supposed to head your Penang Institute, but why suddenly there is a change of directions?
shows me a lot of evidence of that.
Very short one.
What's your name, sir?
Jared,
Lovely.
I'm ISEAS alumnus, yes. Quick one. What is your take if there was a change in government? Because many of the business people I am associated with, they want the VN to continue because of continuity and they've got their paradigms worked out. But if there's a transition, and you mentioned some of it out there, how smooth that transition be, and what will the outcome for places of development like Iskandar be down the road?
One thing for sure, if the Pakatan wins power, it will not want to commit suicide. It will commit suicide if it goes after all the friends of the present government. Because they are friends, today's friends of the today's government, they will be tomorrow's friends of tomorrow's government. So, unless there are some specific individuals you want to think about, like Syed Mokhtar, who's grabbing every GLCs you can find. Other than spectacular examples like that, there will be no need to go after any of those individuals. What we want is introduce competition. Open up many of the monopolies to entry. We are not out to grab anybody, what someone has stolen before, as long as they have stolen it fairly, as some people say. But the big money is not in what that was created in the past. The big money is what they would create in the future. So you want these people to switch over, and these people will switch over. It's just like there are two ways that people switch over. One is certainly age. In other words, any aged leader knows that he steadily loses followers by the day as he switches to the prince in waiting. Just like Mahathir looking at Ibrahim. That's why he had to do Anwar Ibrahim. But anyway, the switching is normal, desirable. And what happens to the stock market in the short run if BN wins? All the cronies have taken the money out, will now bring the money back. But the growth rate of the economy and the growth rate of the stock market will be this. But if the Pakatan would take over, you won't have this short-term immediate boom, but the secular growth rate of what the stock prices would be, if they do what the manifesto say, you have a higher growth rate. Because as Rafizi, one of the key drafter of the manifesto say, the logical implication of manifesto is the end of NEP, end of Mahathirism, end of social engineering, and end of state-dominated economic modernization. So, because that this government would not want to commit, the new government, if it is Pakatan, would not want to commit suicide, it would certainly not punish Iskandar. In fact, Iskandar is a great idea. Why is it being promoted so late? Iskandar has been at Singapore's doorstep ever since the dawn of time. Why? Why do you have Batam first, but nothing on the other side? This is way below. It's unnatural. So Iskandar is certainly to be... now, will Iskandar become a great industrial base? This I have my doubts. Largely because you can have the hardware, but to make it work, you've got to have the software. And this is what's missing in Malaysia. It's just a Tanjung Pelapas. What was its real goal? To basically steal Singapore's shipping business. Has it done so well? It's done okay, but not anywhere what was envisaged. The software is lacking. So what could Iskandar really become? For sure, a beautiful housing development. This is the Discovery Bay of this part of the world. You know Discovery Bay in Hong Kong? You know, you can get from Discovery Bay on Landau Island to Central in 20 minutes on the hovercraft. Iskandar could certainly serve that function. But where is the natural place for Singapore industries to end up? Penang. Software is better. I'm serious. The 5 principles in the software. Okay. Yeah. Well, we look, go on. You may disagree, but I tell you that of what the things you have to choose, I think Penang will be the least ugly that you will find. On your question about structure, part of it is society's change, the aspirations. We are all just not narrow, money-grubbing bastards. Basically, people have a social sense, inclusiveness, and I'm waiting to see. I see a reinvention of the PAP happening right now. I'm reading everything I can about Singapore, about the act of self-rejuvenation. If BAP pulls it off, it will certainly be simply quite unprecedented. That would be great. That means that we can have a peaceful evolution and so forth. It's possible. After all, the UK undertook a big transformation without cutting off the head of his king, right? And the king remains behind to entertain us with his lifestyle. So at least I'm not pessimistic about people reinventing themselves. There are structural problems. They are recognized as structural problems because people, in my opinion, have actually reached a higher level of social consciousness, and they demand such changes in the society they live in. And I think it's good. And on your question of Tunku Aziz, when he was not reappointed senator, I saw that as a great chance to grab somebody for my institute. So I offered him a job. And then he decided, and then he didn't want it. You would have to ask him why he didn't want the job. He has got lots of options. You know, I've always had trouble getting beautiful people to notice me. But you can't help it when you're short, dark, and fat. So.
Okay, I think we'll have to end there. I'm sure you've a lot of questions have been. I'm sure you'll be. I'm sure you'll be thinking about the issues that Prof. Wu has raised tonight and perhaps in the coming weeks ahead, especially since the elections are coming. Tomorrow we'll have another seminar, this time more directly on the elections themselves. So welcome, 3 o'clock I think it is. So sorry?
No, it's 10 to 12 I think.
Is it?
Mr. Chen, you sitting here, you're talking tomorrow.
Was it in the morning?
Yes, 10 in the morning.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'm chairing that. Thanks for telling me. Well, 10 o'clock in the morning, there'll be another seminar with 2 of our fellows speaking on the Malaysian elections more directly.
And
yes,
then you can compare the brain drain. Me, who's the beneficiary of it, and the brains that are staying in Singapore.
So let's thank Prof. Wu most heartily for his wonderful talk.